All right, well, how are you guys all doing today? It's great to be here with you again for the second posting of Toxic Charity Discussion. Really thankful for all of you who are able to respond last week to the post, and really hoping that this next week the rest of you guys can do that as well. Again, the vision for this is just to stimulate some good leadership discussion about a really important issue in the church, which is our compassion efforts. I really look to you guys, and New Song looks to you to continue helping us lead the way in this aspect of ministry at this church. So we're really thankful for your contributions, and again, just hoping that these discussions are productive for you and for me and for us just to continue growing together in this area. So it's not to critique or to be critical. I don't have any hidden motivations. I'm really just trying to allow us to learn together and move forward in a direction that grows New Song and grows our influence in the community. All right, so let's move on to chapters 4 through 6. I want to point out just a couple things. I felt like these chapters gave a lot of really good practical life applications. A lot of the stories he tells are really insightful. I don't know if it establishes a lot of new ideas per se. There's a few, and so I kind of want to highlight those, but it really just builds off of the foundation of chapters 1 through 3. So the first thing I want to share is I really thought there was an insight in his interaction with the pantry lady, kind of in that opening chapter, chapter 4, where she says basically, as the discussion gets more and more heated, she basically concludes that, you know what, our people aren't going to get their lives messy with the financially poor. This is easier and it feels good. And that's how she was describing her pantry as he was trying to help her think through that or critique that model. Now, I bring that up because I think that develops a little bit of what we talked about last week when we say that a lot of our giving efforts sometimes focus more on us than it does on them. And he was really trying to help her to think through, like, wait a minute, so you're okay with this reality. Now, I think New Song has some similarities. I'm preaching to the choir. Carrie, Rodney in particular, I know you guys have lots of significant relationships with people who are not well off financially. But I also know that many in our congregation probably don't share that desire. They haven't done that very extendedly, and many people aren't willing to really invest their time and their resources and their relationships with those who are financially poor. So I think the same temptation that woman was falling into, which is just because it's easier or just because we sense that people may not want to do this, he was trying to point out that, does that mean we should just settle for a form of compassion that isn't actually helpful, that actually lends itself to a toxic relationship? So it's something for us to think about. By the way, I'm not trying to reflect on our pantry in specific, so I really want that to be made very clear. I'm just trying to say I think there's an insight where we can simply look at any compassion effort and say, well, our people won't do this, so we'll settle for this. This is the best we can do. And many times I think it can establish a form of a toxic relationship. Okay? So that's what I am trying to help us think about. A second thing that he points out in that same chapter is the danger of applying a crisis solution to a chronic need. Let me flesh that out. So for example, the Haiti earthquake a few years back was a crisis situation. Non-governmental agencies, governmental agencies, all kinds of people poured into Haiti to help provide emergency food and water, temporary shelter, medical care, so some things that were truly needed or else people are going to die, right? So that would be a crisis. Now, Carissa at Fuller did the intercultural studies, and so she did a lot of classes on developmental work. And a lot of developmental workers think that the crisis scenario is a very short time frame. So even when that earthquake hits, for the next week or 2 or 3 at the most, you might have some of those crisis solution issues, right? But right after that, you must move towards developmental help. How do we find people training and jobs? How do we get there to be projects where we're rebuilding roads so that provides jobs, right? Those sort of things. Things that are developmental. Things where jobs are being handed back to the people who need them most, right? So the idea, though, is that we get ourselves into trouble when we give crisis solutions to a chronic need. When someone is chronically making bad decisions and we apply a crisis solution to that need, we are not going to move in a good direction. So it's something for us to think about. In our ministries, are we applying crisis solutions to chronic needs? Third thing, relationships built on need. So he has a specific quote that I thought was really helpful, and he said this. He said, relationships built on need do not reduce need. Rather, they require more and more need to continue. I thought that was a really profound statement. I don't know if you guys have experienced it. Rodney, I'm sure, I know you've gotten yourself into lots of sticky situations where people have a need and it seems to not go away. So I don't know if you resonate with that statement. I know I do. And one of the ways that even our ministry, our college ministry this year has kind of resonated with that is we have a student. He's actually not a student. He's 26 years old and he lives in a group home, but he's a friend, or one of our college students met him and kind of just invited him into the group and just began a relationship with him, sort of thing. He has a lot of developmental needs and a lot of issues in his life. One that's been very apparent to us all is hygiene issues. Even though he has a home and even though he has access to a shower and a laundromat, he's developed over many years some really, really bad habits where, you know, he almost dresses and smells as bad, or many times even worse than kind of the typical homeless person. So he comes to group like that a lot, and which is very challenging. And in a lot of our interactions, especially early on in the fall, he brings need after need after need. I need this, I need clothes, I need this, I need this, I need this, that type of thing. And there were times where some students pitched in to help out, and where I've even pitched in to help out in different ways. But over time we've seen, I really think a lot of his needs are not needs. There are a lot of the times he uses the little bit of money that he gets from his dad here and there to some things that aren't good. He overextends himself. He's not learning the right ways to use money. He actually has lots of things. He just chooses not to do laundry or chooses not to shower every day. So some very practical level things where I've tried to coach him on that. I've tried to have hard conversations with him, and sometimes they're received okay, and sometimes they're not. And it's been really difficult because there's lots of ways where I'm like, I don't know if we've really helped him to progress this year. So that's kind of a confession, a difficulty. But I really resonate with this idea when relationships are established by need, they actually just require more and more need because people keep coming back for the same things or even for more things. And so we've got to see how can we enter into both at the beginning and then continually maintain it, where we have mutually reciprocal friendships. I think that's huge. Finally, kind of the last thing, and then I'll get to our questions that I would love you to respond to this week, is he promotes the idea of a focused instead of a diversified approach when we're talking about helping others or compassionate efforts. So he gave that analogy in our stock portfolio, in our retirement portfolio. We want to have a diversified front because if one area goes bad, your whole portfolio isn't ruined, right? But he says that's a horrible application when we're trying to think of really development issues in a specific area. Okay, and so he talked about how FCS goes block by block or neighborhood by neighborhood and will stay there for 5-10 years, whatever it takes to begin a real holistic development of that area instead of trying to do so many things. Because you know what? If we are going to build relationships that are truly mutually reciprocal, that's going to take time. If we're going to work on job training and skills, that's going to take time. It's going to take resources. He talks about the priority of loans over just simple grants. But a lot of these things are going to take time, talent, treasures to make happen. And we cannot fall into the trap of quick fixes. So I thought all 4 of those points were really important from these 3 chapters. All right. Now, I have basically 2 questions that I would love to see you focus on this week in your post. The first one is this, and he said this on page 63 if you end up wanting to go back there. He says a guiding question for our compassion work needs to be this: what outcomes would we actually like to see from our charity efforts? So what outcomes would we like to see from our ministry? So I would like you to wrestle with that question this week. If you could start from scratch, or actually just pretend, try to apply it to your context, but say, okay, what are the real needs in this community? And what are the outcomes that I want to see happen? Then the second question to go through that, so please articulate 3 to 6 outcomes you would like to see for your ministry, or 3 to 6 needs that you see in the community that you would like to see growth in, if you will. Okay? And the second one is, then you need to match that up with what would need to get restructured to produce such outcomes. Right? So, and if the outcomes are dead on, you go, hey, these are the outcomes I think that are needed, and look at what the ministry is doing, and that matches up, wonderful. You can say that. But if you're saying, wow, these outcomes are very different than what the ministry is actually producing, what do you think would need to get structured? Now, and it's okay, again, it doesn't mean it needs to get restructured tomorrow, but is there a path, or are there some next steps, if you will, that we begin a restructuring process? We might even conclude, some of the ministries that we're doing are good, but what if there are other needs as well in the community that maybe are even more important, right? So it's just something to think about. So what are the outcomes that you would like for your charity or your ministry efforts to focus on? And then what would need to get restructured to produce those outcomes if the current structure isn't producing those outcomes? All right, again, really hoping and looking forward to those posts this week because I, again, appreciate so much what you guys are doing. You're a great blessing to New Song, and I look forward to seeing what you have to say this week. All right.